Oh, hello. So, your project is ready to be glazed. How do you know it's ready? Well, it has gone through a firing and is now bisqueware. So it's turned into stone, you can hear it, and it can no longer be turned into slip. So now it's time to add some color, right? We're gonna make this a little more creative. To do this, you will paint the surface with glaze. Now, glaze is different than paint. Okay, so there are a few things that you need to know before you get started. Number one, glaze is different than paint, and we're gonna learn about how it's different as this goes on. Number two, glaze is expensive. Each one of these bottles is worth like $25, so please be careful with how you use it. The other thing is that glaze will look different after it has been fired, and last, glaze needs multiple coats for it to work. Okay, so you can't just paint one layer on and then be done with it. So there are two different types of glazes that we're going to be using, and you will need to use each kind at least once. But before we start with the glaze, you want to prepare the surface of your object. So to do that, I have some sandpaper that'll be over here in this little container. The sandpaper is just meant to knock down some of the areas that might have too much texture. Maybe you didn't smooth them out enough with the sponge. It can't take off like whole corners or something, but it can smooth out some areas that were a little more rough than you wanted them to be. So you'll sand your surface. Once that's started, once that's done, you are going to then add the glaze. So we're first going to start talking about overglaze. Remember, there are two kinds, overglaze and underglaze. To start with the overglaze, those are located here on this shelf. This type of glaze is made from various types of chemicals and minerals, and they create interesting patterns when they go into the kiln after they go through the firing. So here's an example of an overglaze. You don't have any control over where the patterns come out, and so that could be fun, but it also, could be different depending on what you're trying to do. This is an example of underglaze. So you can see the pattern obviously was much more controlled here. But let's keep talking about overglaze. So overglaze, like I said, is in these bottles, and you can see what we have available and how it will come out on these charts over here. We only have the ones that are circled with a pen. Before you use overglaze, you must first mix the bottle. All of the stuff that makes the pattern, if you can see here, there's these little tiny flecks in here, or little tiny kind of like granules. All of these things are what makes the pattern, and they settle to the bottom as the glaze sits on the shelf. So they must be mixed before you use them every time. And you can't just shake it like this and expect it to work. Instead, what you're gonna have to do is take off the cap, and I'll have these stir sticks over here available for you to use. And you really have to mix it from the bottom, and you can feel the granules on there. So once you don't feel those granules anymore, then you'll know that it has been mixed completely. And once you're done mixing, kind of squeegee off some of it onto the edge. Make sure you rinse your stir stick and return it back to the container. Once your glaze is mixed, you're going to use a brush, and you're going to paint it on the surface of your project, just like you would, for regular paint. So you dip it into the bottle, and then you can paint it onto the surface. With glaze, you have to use multiple coats, and you need to, for solid coverage, and you need to let those coats dry in between each one. And the glaze will dry very quickly because the bisqueware, or the clay, sucks in that moisture as you're glazing it. So you just definitely need to let it dry between coats. And I recommend also experimenting. So you have to do at least 2 coats, maybe experimenting with layering one type of overglaze over a different type of overglaze. Let's say you wanted to do this one with this one on top of it, and see how those mix together. You won't know how it will look until it comes out of the kiln, which is kind of fun. Okay. The other thing that's very important, we cannot glaze the bottoms of our objects, and that goes for overglaze as well as underglaze. When the glaze is in the kiln and it heats up, it turns into a liquid, and that liquid starts to flow on the surface of the object, and once it cools down, that liquid turns into glass. If you have glaze on the bottom, that liquid will turn into glass, but it will stick to the kiln shelf. Any piece of your project that is touching the surface of the table, for example, should not be glazed, because once it is stuck on that kiln shelf, the only way for me to get it off would be with a chisel, which will destroy your project as well as the shelf. So no glazing the bottoms or the things that touch the table. Okay, so that's overglaze. That's located here. You only have access to this shelf, okay, nothing above. But let's talk about underglaze. Remember, you're gonna have to try to use both on different objects. So underglaze is basically just colored slip, so clay plus water plus color, and you have much more control over where the colors go. In fact, when you are working with underglaze, I recommend using pencil to kind of draw out what designs you're gonna have on your object before you start painting. So here you can see an example of a flower. I did it with the leaf as well, so that I know where I'm gonna be putting the color. The pencil marks burn out in the kiln, so you will not see them once the piece is done. Okay, so the underglaze is located in this cabinet down here underneath the overglaze. Get it? Under the overglaze. And there are buckets that look like this. Okay, each bucket has 12 different colors in it, and they are sets. So I ask that you take one bucket to your table. If there's already one there, just share what's there. Don't bring two over, because we don't want to mix up the sets. We want to make sure that each person, when they open this up, has all of these colors to work with. Okay, underglazes, just like overglaze looks different after it's fired, so does underglaze. Underglaze, you can see on this chart up here, these, for example, here's a good example. This leaf green will when you put it on your object, it'll dry and it'll look like that. Once it comes out of the kiln, it will be much darker. So refer to this chart to help you figure out what color you want as you're working. Now, underglaze needs 2 coats as well for solid coverage. If you put less than 2 coats, you'll have like an interesting watercolor effect. So let me show you what that looks like. So here is an example of a solid 2 coats. And then here is an example of less coats, right? So this maybe was 1 coat, and you can see that it starts to look brushy. You can see the texture still. Here, you can also see this has many coats, whereas on the back here, it had 2 different coats going in different directions, but they were very light coats. So think about how much underglaze you're putting on your object and what effect that's gonna have. Okay, so these are also very expensive. When you are glazing, let's say you're starting with your yellow color, right? You have your brush and you've shaken this up. This one doesn't need to be stirred, it can be shaken. You open it up, you're painting on your object, and now you're like, oh, I wanna do a different color. I'm gonna do black. So you take your brush that now has yellow on it and you dip it into the black. You've just contaminated the black, okay? And this now will be ruined for the next person that tries to use it. So please, 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 please wash your brush between colors and do not mix these colors. Don't pour one color into the other color, okay? There's plenty of options to choose from because we have a set of 12 separate colors. Okay, and remember, these are expensive. We wanna take the best care of them that we can. When using underglaze, it's important to start with the lightest color first. And the reason for that is, when you put a dark color down, so let's say I have I painted black on this whole thing, and then I try to put light color on top of that black, the dark color will shine through the light color once it's fired. So you won't see that light color anymore. So if you start with your light colors and then come in later and put your dark colors in, that will be more likely to work out for you, okay? So light colors first, then dark colors. Once you've put underglaze on your project, now underglaze you should be focusing on glazing your entire object. Once you're done and you've done your multiple coats and you've done the inside and the rim, remember, not the bottom, nothing that touches the shelf. In order to finish an underglaze project, you need to add a clear gloss. So the clear gloss is also located down here. It's in this bucket. You can see it says gloss clear, okay? This needs at least 2 coats. You must make sure that your underglaze is dry first before you put this on for it to work. Okay, and that will seal it in, that will make it have a shiny surface. If you don't put clear gloss on it, it won't seal the clay and it will have like a matte surface. So you must put clear gloss on there. If you find that any of these colors are running out in the jars for the underglaze, let me know and I can fill them up for you. That's basically it. So that's a lot of information. Please let me know if you have any questions. And remember, you need to do an object with both overglaze, which has the clear gloss built in, or underglaze, which is that colored slip that you put the clear gloss on after. All right, have fun.